Wishing you all a wonderful morning and a happy Science Day. I would like to welcome you all to GEMS 2022 Result Declaration Ceremony for VSF 2022, Srishti 2022 and FLAIR 2022. Firstly, I would like to bring to your notice regarding the importance of this day. February 28 is celebrated as National Science Day to commemorate the discovery of Raman effect by physicist C.V. Raman on this day in 1928, enabling him to become Nobel laureate. With much delight, we are here to announce the winners of each category across all age groups. With more than 10,000 participation, the judging panel had a tedious job in hand to judge the winners, to choose the best among the best. It was done in a free and fair manner, a process which required due diligence and was completed in a time-bound manner. We are really astonished to see the creativity of students, be it drawing or painting or else singing, and the working and still models. The organizing committee of GEMS 2022 would like to thank all the teachers and parents for the effort, hard work and wholehearted cooperation they have put in order to ensure the participation of their respective wards. Parents and teachers, kindly be noted that registration for the next edition of GEMS, which is GEMS 2023, would commence on 2022 November 14th, coinciding with Children's Day, and the last date of registration is January 14th, 2023. GEMS 2023 would commence on January 24, coinciding with International Day of Education, and would continue till January 26 as of this year, and similarly the result will be published on February 28 on National Science Day. The only difference is that we intend to conduct it in an offline format if the social conditions permit. We would like to inform you all that from the next edition of GEMS, we would be including a Best Teachers Award category. All the winners would be contacted either through phone or via email. Those of you who have not won in any category need not feel disappointed, since all the entries were exceptionally good and the judging panel has its constraints, since only 3 participants could be adjudged winners for each category. All those of you who have participated are extremely talented. Since participation is more important than winning, we request all the participants, irrespective of the results, to keep nurturing your talents and follow your passion. The organizing committee of GEMS 2022 had initially decided to declare the winners on a district and state level of Kerala, considering it to be the home state. But the overwhelming participation from other states across India and a considerable amount of participation from the Indian diaspora abroad has led to change in our decision, else it would be an injustice to the participants of other states and countries. Moreover, participation for certain categories from a few districts in Kerala was very low. Taking all these factors into account, the winners of each category has been decided on a global level. Kindly be informed that the age calculation of the participants was computer generated based on their date of birth, and the age category assigned for each participant has been done in a foolproof manner. All the winners are requested to WhatsApp their photographs along with their name and GEMS ID to the below displayed number. And the results are now available at www.gems2022.in. Now, we would be replaying the keynote address on the future of Indian education in light of National Education Policy 2020 by Dr. Shekila T. Shamsu, Secretary to the Committee to Draft National Education Policy 2020 and Officer on Special Duty at Department of Higher Education, Ministry of Education, Government of India. This is specially meant for the parents and teacher in order to give them an insight regarding the National Education Policy 2020.
Greetings to one and all. At the outset, let me first wish each one of you a very happy successful and a prosperous new year. We are here on January 14th, which also is a day which heralds New Year for many within this country, called Pongal in some parts, Lohri in some parts, Bihu in some parts, Makar Sankranti in some parts, and India is celebrating all these festivals. So let me greet each one of you on this occasion also. And I am happy to speak on a very important educational reform document, which all of you are aware of, and that's the National Education Policy 2020, which was approved by the Union Cabinet on 29th of July 2020. And as we speak today, it's almost about a year and 6 months since the policy has been approved. It is very right to put in perspective first, before understanding the recommendations of the National Education Policy, what is the context within which the policy has been brought out, and also the process that went into the policy making exercise, because both these are quite unique. As far as the process goes, you are all aware that education in the Indian context within the Indian Constitution is a subject listed in the concurrent list, and is therefore the prerogative of both the Government of India and the state governments to function on the subject of education in terms of both the policy making and the implementation of it. While largely the school education comes within the ambit of the state government, as far as higher education, which includes the technical education and the professional education, it is largely decided by the overall norms and standards laid down by the Government of India and autonomously implemented through the higher education institutions offering those undergraduate, postgraduate, and doctoral programs. And therefore, it becomes very important to understand that the Government of India embarked in 2014 in this very mammoth exercise of trying to bring about a national education policy, the last being in 1986, which was to a certain extent modified with a program of action in 1992. And so it was good 3 decades later that we were looking into a new education policy for our country. Now, it was very important, given the fact that we were technologically situated at a different point of time than what it was in 1986, to look at all the online and the digital platforms through which consultations could take place. It was equally important that the depth of that particular subject came in for expert consultations, and therefore, for that purpose, the ministry had brought out a background note, or rather 33 background notes, which were on the 33 themes were covering both higher and school education. They are still there in the public domain on the Ministry of Education's website and accessible to anyone who was interested in knowing what these background notes look like. And we also had the institutions driving the discussions, the autonomous institutions, which included in the school education, the NCRT, CBSE, the Kendriya Vidyalayas, many of the institutions in the school, as well as in higher, the UGC, the AICTE, the National Council for Teacher Education, AIU, and a lot of central universities, including IITs and so on. And the industry connect part of it through the industry associations were also involved in the discussions. Now, being a subject in the concurrent list, which I said at the beginning, it was very important that the entire country and all its bodies came together in the consultation process. So we had the grassroots level consultations, and many people may not be aware as to the humongous nature of that exercise that was undertaken in terms of trying to reach out to about 6 lakhs villages through the Gram Panchayats, about 600 odd districts, 3,000 odd urban local bodies, 6,000 the taluk level bodies that were taken up. And we had national level consultation and also zonal level consultations and state level consultations. Now, these all aggregated, and these were not done like it was not done in a sense that it was done only manually. We had the National Informatics Center, the NIC, generating as many as 7 lakh user IDs so that every participant in each of these units, the villages, the talukas, the urban local bodies, the districts, and the state governments had user IDs, and their state information officers, where the physical meetings were being held, were actually uploading scanned documents of resolutions taken or decisions taken or recommendations made, suggestions made, putting it on the website. We as master users in the ministry were the super admins who were able to access this and collate that information. And it was a massive task. And prior to really the policy that is brought out by, which is the report, draft National Education Policy Report of 2019, which was the Kasturirangan Committee report, that before that, we had about 5 lakh suggestions that had come in through these various exercises. Why this is important for us to understand is that the policy initiative started from 2014, and it is only in July 2020 that the policy has been approved, which was a good 5.5 years that we went into the policy making exercise. And therefore, one of the most participatory and consultative exercises in trying to bring about a national education policy for the entire nation of this country. The other important aspect is the rationale. Many seem to ask, what was wrong with the 86 policy that we need to bring about a new policy? And I would like to really clarify that. Policies that are there in existence, there is nothing wrong with them. It is only that policies exist in a socio-economic context. And obviously, the context that existed in 86 or 92 has changed drastically as we moved into the 21st century. And therefore, the rationale that there should be a new policy. One, the advent of the information and communication technologies and the disruptive technologies like artificial intelligence, big data, machine learning, virtual reality, robotics, and so on, calls for a lot of rethinking and a relook at the way our education system is synced to these kind of changes. The second is the fact that we were in an information-based society around the turn of the century, and now we have moved to a knowledge-based society. So the move from information to knowledge makes the entire perspective of looking at youth whom the policy is addressing, that is young students who are in schools and in colleges and in universities, the kind of knowledge, capabilities, and skills that they may need from a society which was information-based to a knowledge-based society with information and communication technologies and disruptive technologies, and living in a globally connected world where the challenges and dynamics of both social requirements, economic requirements, political requirements, overall, the entire changes that happen within the world itself calls for a totally different perspective of how to address educational systems, structures, processes, and the way in which teaching learning will have to be transacted in the coming years. So the National Education Policy is a transformative document which is not making tinkering reforms. It is transforming totally the very nature of how we look at education, how teaching learning should take place, how curricular choices should be made, how pedagogical tools need to be transformed, how assessment needs to be transformed. Why? Because students, teachers, and educational institutions need to be given the right kind of background and the background and the perspective to meet with the challenges of the 21st century. So the fact that all these changes call for a new set of knowledge, capabilities, and skills in our students, and teachers will have to be catalyzed to bring about these changes, and educational institutions will have to be empowered so that they will be able to take care of these requirements of a new learning paradigm suited to the 21st century. So in the genesis of education policy making, the National Education Policy 2020 is the third in the policies. The first one having come out in 68, the second one having come out in 86, and the third one having come out in 2020. but the first of the kind in the 21st century. And the policy clearly itself says that this will remain almost till 2040 because the very nature of the changes that we are envisaging calls for a lot of time lag, because any social changes that we bring about do not happen overnight. And therefore, all the changes that we are looking at will take a long time for institutions to imbibe and evolve and move into the new scenario that we are envisaging. Now, two other points before I move into the main recommendations of the national education policy itself. One, that the nature of education or learning, as we look at, has been very clearly outlined in a UNESCO report, commonly referred to as the Jacques Delors Commission report of 1996. The title of that report is very significant to note. It is Learning in the 21st Century, Learning the Treasure Within. Mind you, the word is learning the treasure within. And it says that learning as an activity itself is not a unidimensional activity, but a multidimensional activity. And it identifies four pillars of learning. Learning to know, which we normally understand as the cognitive part of learning. Learning to do, which is the skills-based, the experiential-based, the practical part of it. Learning to live together and to live with others. That is the peaceful coexistence and the need for sustainable living. And finally, learning to be, which is the self-actualization of one's own talents and potential. So the four learning aspects or the dimensions of learning: learning to know, learning to do, learning to live together and to live with others, and learning to be, itself calls for a very different approach to the way teaching learning needs to take place, and the need for customization and flexibility to suit individual needs and talents and aspirations. The other important factor is that India as a country is committed to the Sustainable Development Goals of 2030. And within the Global Committee of Nations, under the SDG Goal 4, there is clearly a mandate that we will ensure providing inclusive and equitable quality education for all with lifelong learning opportunities. So it is a commitment, it's a global commitment that we have made, that as part of sustainable development of people, planet, and having prosperity around, you need to ensure inclusive and equitable quality education for each and every one. When you say for all, with lifelong learning opportunities, because the nature of a knowledge society is that the obsolescence of knowledge calls for it to be a lifelong exercise, not something that takes place at a certain period of time and you have acquired it all. That scenario has changed. So we do not have the luxury of having the fossilization of knowledge at a certain point of time. It is rather a continuous exercise. And if we believe, like the Darwinian theory of survival, that if the fittest can only survive, then those who need to survive will have to constantly upgrade their knowledge and their skills and their capabilities to become relevant to themselves, relevant to the society, and relevant to the economy, and therefore to the nation as a whole. Ultimately, individual growth, societal development, economic growth, and finally national development move together in a seamless manner. And unless youth are productive, you cannot achieve economic growth, neither can it lead to national development, which is again a very contextual factor for us to understand. India as a country is blessed with the youngest population in the world today, with an average age of a median age of just about 29. This window of opportunity, we say, is going to be there till 2036. This demographic profile of our nation needs to be leveraged optimally. It can be leveraged optimally only if the youth are gainfully employed, are socially conscious citizens, and therefore contributing to a vibrant economy and a knowledge society. Therefore, if you want education to be the tool or the catalyst by which this change has to happen, you need to have an education system which addresses the learning in the 21st century, the 4 dimensions of learning. With all this in mind, the National Education Policy, which has been approved, is just a small, crisp document of just about 66 pages. It outlines 5 goals: goals of access, equity, quality, affordability, and accountability. And in the very first chapter, it identifies 22 cardinal principles. The first one is the one which is the rationale why all the recommendations in the NEP 2020 have been made in the manner that it is. It says that it is to recognize, identify, and nurture the unique potential of every child, and the education system must contribute to his or her holistic development. And this reiteration that an education system that we are having must recognize, identify, and nurture the unique potential of every child and nurture his or her holistic development makes out a very strong case of moving from structured learning systems to flexible learning systems, flexibility in curricular choices, flexibility in the language or the mediums of instruction, flexibility in language choices that they make, flexibility in the teaching learning approaches through changes in the tools and the pedagogical tools and the assessment tools, and flexibility which allows for the flowering of every individual as per his or her talent. So the current scenario where we put a premium to say that only someone who is an engineer or someone who is a doctor or someone who studies science or someone who studies technology is at a premium to someone who studies social sciences or performs in music or is good at dramatics or is good at a language, that is sought to be changed, because as human beings, we have multiple intelligences, multiple talents. One may be good at math, somebody else may be good at playing a sport. And we need to say that both are equally good. And therefore, in a society, all these talents should be allowed to be nurtured. The current system of education does not give that flexibility. And that is why both in the school education and in the higher education, we have talked about integrated learning and allowing for these multiple choices to come about. I hope you're able to appreciate why this context becomes very important, because many felt that it is a whimsical thought to bring about this kind of wide-ranging reforms that the policy is talking about. So in the school education, let us start with the foundational learning that is emphasized. So right at the start, we are talking about a very robust early childhood care and education, an ECCE program. And we have said that the new curricular and pedagogical structure, not physical restructuring, mind you, is the 5+3+3+4, which is not a physical restructuring, because many are sort of disturbed and disconcerted, saying that we have a 10+2 system. Why do we want to go to a 5+3+3+4? Please, let me reiterate the point. This is an approach to learning. No physical restructuring of schools need to be done. We don't have to cut down schools. We don't have to merge schools. None of these things have to be done. Schools remain physically where they are, even as they stand today. All that we are saying is that learning happens with a certain connection to age-appropriate learning. And with age, there is a kind of a correlation between the kind of all the skills that we have, and appropriate to that kind of kind of age-related learning, we are restructuring this to a 5+3+3+4 architecture. What does this entail? In the first 5 years, which we are taking is from age 3 to 8, is your foundational stage, which is talking about a robust ECCE program. And why a robust ECCE program? Currently, we have an Anganwadi system which takes care of the immunization program, which takes care of the health and nutrition of the mother and the child. And the third vertical that they had was education. I think all of us will understand that the Anganwadi system has been doing human service to the health of the mother and the child. There is no doubt about that. We would not have been able to achieve the health indicators that we have had it not been for the grassroots level Anganwadi system and the Anganwadi workers and the Asha workers who have been doing wonderful in terms of ensuring the better nutrition and health of the child, a newborn child, as well as a new mother. But the education part calls for a different set of skills. And unfortunately, you cannot expect the Anganwadi worker to look at all these dimensions. Now, India being a country which has a large number of people depending on the Anganwadi system, the bulk of our young learners in that age group of 3 to 6 are bereft of any learning because in the Anganwadi system, there is no learning that is taken. And it is only immunization and nutrition part that is being taken care of. So the rest of those, the 20% of those who are going to preschools and play schools, and I'm not saying that the existing preschools and play schools are doing a wonderful job because they are actually doing formal learning of learning, reading, writing, and arithmetic, which should not be done at age 3, which is very, very harmful. What is the empirical evidence is that the human brain, the neural networks in the human brain get connected maximum between the ages of 0 to 6. And after 6, whatever neural development had to take place, it stops. It is very slow subsequent to that. And if the child has not been prepared to learn, for preparing to assimilate by various joyful activities that are given, play-based method of learning. It is not at all formal learning. It is not reciting your nursery rhymes. It is not saying your ABCDs and any of these things. You have to initiate children into play-based activities so that their coordination, their brain connections are all sort of developed, by which they can make understanding of their own assumptions of things that are there around. What is heat, what is light, what is sound, what is colors, what are shapes. And for all this, the person need not use a paper and a pencil at all. It should be only with toys. It is a toy-based pedagogy in that age. And why this is very significant for bringing it in a robust manner is that since bulk of India's children go to the Anganwadi center, where none of these activities can be taken place, we should have that within the Ministry of Education and the state departments of education, where let us start from 3 to 6, and we call that the foundational stage between 3 to 8. Ideally, in the draft NEP, we said this should be without any classes. But since we are so structured and we don't want children to be without any class, we have 3 years of preschool or the early childhood and 2 years of grade 1 and grade 2. And this stage should be purely for initiating a child into the learning exercise. And this is where the child draws connections between shapes, between colors, between numbers, and therefore their reading, writing, and basic counting abilities start getting sort of prepared in a manner by which their assimilation becomes easier. It is at this stage that we have also realized that in our schooling system, the maximum dropouts happen between grade 3 to 5. And why that happens is because between these grades, since the child who came from the Anganwadi system has no background of preparedness to learn and is sitting in a class where the teacher is already talking about things with an assumption that they are already aware of it, the child mentally switches off. And since the child switches off, it can do for 1 year, 2 years, 3 years. After some time, The parents feel, the children feel that the child is not gaining anything, therefore the child drops out. Or even if the child does not drop out, the child goes on progressively into higher classes without actually learning the fundamentals. And therefore, you have reports which are very scathing reports saying a grade 5 student does not know how to do the counting of a grade 2 student. It is not the fault of the student at all. It is because the system is not looking at how the student can learn more effectively. And therefore, the foundational stage has a foundational literacy and numeracy mission targeted to ensure that all children will achieve basic literacy and numeracy skills, what we normally call the 3 R's of reading, writing, and arithmetic, by the time the child reaches the grade 3. And with a target of achieving this by 2025, and the Nipun Bharat scheme that has been started has been with this effort, along with a robust ECCE program with a national curricular and pedagogical framework for early childhood care and education. So the first 5 stages, and let me say about the implementation because it is already there. The school education department has brought out a document which is available in public domain called Sarthak. Based on Sarthak, which is the implementation plan of the Department of School Education and Literacy, the Nipun Bharat scheme or mission has already been launched. And along with that, they are also framing the curricular framework for early childhood care and education, which will look at joy-based learning, activity-based learning, and not formal education up to the age of 6, and only beyond 6 that they will start with the grade 1 and the grade 2. And in the stages that we are thinking between the 5 to 6, we would like to see the school education department taking it over. Even now, we are not allowing for age 3 and age 4 because we feel that it will be a gradual exercise where we have to work in tandem and in coordination with the Department of WCD, which looks at women and child. It will have to be in tandem with the Ministry of Health and Family Welfare, which looks at the nutrition part of it. It will have to be in tandem with the Department of Tribal Affairs, which looks at children who live in the tribal regions. So a task force, a joint task force is already functioning where the Ministry of Education, along with all these ministries, and parallel structures will have to be worked out even at the state government level so that we are in line with what the national education policy is talking about. Now, the next stage, the plus 3, that is between 8 to 11. And these classes, that is the grade 3, 4, and 5, will have that formal initiation into learning and a honing of the understanding of basics which are required in those classes. Coming further, the next 3 is 11 to 14, and which is the middle school stage. And this is where we are actually introducing what we are talking about, doing away with curricular differentiation and saying that what currently we say is curricular, co-curricular, extracurricular, arts, science, vocational, academic, which we make where students are divided as per these choices and weightage is given to these subjects. So currently, if a child learns painting or a child is good at singing or dramatics or playing a sport, we call that either as being co-curricular or called as extracurricular, and no weightage is given. But that is defeating what we have said in our first cardinal principle, that children have multiple talents and multiple potential. And if someone is good at numbers and therefore at maths, that somebody who is singing or doing dance or doing dramatics or saying, reciting a poetry or has carpentry as a skill, any of these should be given equal weightage. So from class 6 onwards, and the CBSE is already doing that. So as I mentioned, the fact that we are a subject in the concurrent list, the Central Board of Secondary Education, since it has a network of Kendriya Vidyalayas and CBSE affiliated schools, these reforms are already being sort of plugged in. And it is for the state governments also to take a cue so that children who are coming out from state board examinations are not denied this kind of facility of allowing students to take combination of courses. Why this is becoming important becomes all the more for an understanding, because in higher education, we are moving towards multidisciplinary education. So from class 6, these changes followed by, if you have to have this kind of changes, you also need to look at what you are assessing a student for. Currently, we have an emphasis on rote-based learning, memorization, and therefore testing the memory of a child, and where in a real sense, no learning is taking place. So a child is merely sort of memorizing with no understanding, no contextual understanding in real. How do you apply that in the practical settings? And as a consequence, vomits whatever has been memorized on an answer sheet without actually assimilating that, internalizing that, and therefore finally, when the child is asked something about fundamentals and concepts, and child is looking almost helplessly at you. So in order to change that, move away from rote-based learning to testing competencies of the child, to testing the abilities of the child, the capacities of the child, by including project-based activities, giving them practicals, giving them even internship kind of activities, so that they relate that to real life settings. And mind you, very clearly the policy has said that even if we are using NCERT textbooks, we have to locally contextualize that, because example should be something that the child relates to. The socio-economic context, the local geography, the local culture, this has to be understood. Therefore, nowhere in the policy we have said that there will be uniform textbooks. Textbooks will have a curricula which will be covered, but all that the state government has to do is to adapt that to the local context so that the child is able to relate to that. It is also important in a country like India, where there are huge differences from within a state, from region to region, from tribal areas to hilly areas, and you cannot give examples where the child has not even seen that kind of an ecosystem at all. So the textbooks also will have to be changed accordingly. And all this by giving the child activities which are again contextualized. We also wanted that skills should be something that we look at from class 6 onwards, including at the other end, the digital skills, the coding part of it. So many are saying that we are doing a grave injustice by introducing coding in class 6 onwards. No, the world has moved towards that. Let us understand that COVID has been a kind of a phenomenon which has accelerated the way we use technology. And many of the Internet of Things and artificial intelligence is using these kind of computer programming. And if our children do not get exposed to it, and mind you, you and I might feel very odd about it, but the students who are there are children who are born in the century where the internet was there when they were born, unlike you and me, where internet is a new thing to us. Therefore, we are grappling with the technology, whereas they are actually so deft at it that they don't feel anything in terms of learning coding, which we feel is a huge burden on them. No, they will do it effortlessly. They make their own YouTube channels, they make their own TikTok videos. They do all this because they are already there with that technology. What we are only doing is moving away from an entertainment base to a kind of understanding where they really do something in a learning exercise, which can give them entrepreneurial skills, which can give them opportunities as they grow up, not necessarily to seek jobs, but also become job creators themselves, and therefore become software developers and so on. So why should we look at it from that point of view is something that I'm not able to understand many apprehensions being said. But immediately on vocational skills also, India is a country with a huge number of crafts and artisans. It can be brassware, it can be metalware, it can be embroidery, it can be textiles, it can be fish farming, many of these things which have been there for generations and generations. And children should be able to relate to all these vocational crafts, including agriculture. Mind you, this is something that is really very striking. If you ask a child living in metropolitan cities, Where did this apple come from? And I'm not talking about a 6-year-old or a 10-year-old child. Even if you ask a person in the teens, the person will tell you it has either come from Reliance Fresh or it has come from Big Basket. That is the degree of ignorance where they are not able to understand that there is something that is cultivated. You need to plant a seed. The seed grows in a certain manner. You need to protect it. Fertilizers are required. Pesticides are required. Then only that big tree will start yielding the fruit. In a country which is purely agrarian, let us understand, India lives in its villages. It is very important that the understanding of agriculture, farming and production, even if you are not a farmer yourself, is very, very critical to the child's appreciation of the fact that this is how, then only they understand the value of what is agriculture all about. So from class 6, 10 days of bagless days, so that they intern with artisans and craftsmen and village, go to the village and understand with the farmers. This kind of exercise, of course, the logistics and working it out all requires a lot of effort. But this is a part of the teaching learning exercises that we would like to see from class 6 onwards. And obviously, when we do these kind of activities, the assessment will gradually shift from testing memory to testing competencies, and therefore real learning would take place in our children. So that is your middle school stage, and then the secondary stage from 14 to 18, where students can make their choices in terms of their subjects, and the class 10 and the class 12 board exams will all be restructured. You already saw that, because from this year onwards, the CBSE class 10 is, as per the new requirement, it is being conducted in 2 parts. The first part is purely objective based. Of course, there may be issues in terms of how children react to that, parents react to that, schools are struggling with that. But it is, any change initially would have its share of teething problems, and this is already being implemented. Now, what we said in the 5 plus 3 plus 3 plus 4, if you now understand, is not physical restructuring, it's just the approach to learning, the approach to curricular choices. And let me also introduce the aspect of multilingualism and language here. Many asked us this question, why we advocated or made a recommendation of learning in the early classes in mother tongue instruction, or what we call as home language and local language. The same kind of empirical evidence. There is actual empirical evidence to tell us that children learn in the language that they are most familiar with in the initial stages. And the most common language they are connected by is the umbilical cord, the mother's language. But since today families speak multiple languages, it might be that the home language is not necessarily the mother's language. It may be a different tongue altogether. Therefore, we said up to grade 3, preferably if possible up to grade 5, and there is no compulsion. We are only saying that ideally it is desirable if schools can offer in these early classes education in their mother tongue or home language or local language. This is the most challenging recommendation to be implemented. Every state government will have to map and do an exercise. How many teachers are available who can teach in these different languages? And merely because we said it is mother tongue education in up to grade 3 or grade 5, it is not to say that they will not learn other languages like English or Hindi or any other languages. So even in the 3-language formula, which is not a recommendation of this policy, it is a recommendation of the Kothari Commission report brought out in 1968. The 3-language formula that we are saying in the NEP 2020 is promoting a flexibility in terms of the offerings of the languages. The original 3-language formula wants that we will learn a regional language, and where Hindi is being spoken as the regional language, they will learn a Dravidian language or a non-Hindi language. It could also be Bengali, or it could be Odia, or it could be Assamese, which are other languages other than Hindi. And you will learn English. That is a 3-language formula when it comes to the Hindi-speaking belt. When it comes to the non-Hindi speaking belt, it is the regional language, learning Hindi and then learning English. Ideally, the non-Hindi speaking belt, everybody did the 3-language formula. because we know our regional language, we know Hindi and we know English, except for Tamil Nadu, which never followed the three language format. But the entire northern belt, which has the Hindi heartland, only learned two languages. They only learned Hindi because that was the regional language, and they never learned any other non-Hindi language, and they had English. Some places learned Sanskrit, that's all. But they never learned Assamese or Bengali or Odia or Tamil or Kannada or Malayalam or Telugu. They never learned it at all. So what we said is that allow for a flexibility to the language formula, where you can take up three languages in such a way that two are native Indian languages. And we have given the encouragement to have even foreign language education as you go into secondary stages. Why? Because multilingualism promotes cognitive development. There is empirical evidence to say the more you learn languages, the more your brain cognition is activated, and which contributes to cognitive development and better understanding and better learning. And there is a UNESCO report which says that languages are best learned between the ages of 2 to 8. And children can pick up to a maximum of as many as 17 languages in that age without any great effort being done. As we grow older, our ability to learn languages comes down. So in the school education, the major reforms are related to the academic part in this configuration that we are talking, which talks about a robust ECC program, a foundational literacy and numeracy mission mode approach, looking at also the whole idea of multilingualism, the changes in the teaching learning, the curricular choices, and the assessment. And let us come to the aspect of equity, because equity in NEP 2020 is covered in two chapters, chapter 6 and chapter 14. And chapter 6 deals with the school education part of it, which looks at more or less the recommendations remain largely the same. But the idea is that when you look at the gross enrollment ratio in school education also, those who are belonging to the socially and economically disadvantaged groups, that is a term that we have coined in the policy. The umbrella term and omnibus term to include the SCs, STs, OBCs, religious and linguistic minorities, urban poor, women, transgenders, those living in geographically inaccessible areas, living in hilly and tribal areas, children of migrant labor, all these categories together, we used a large term called the socially and economically disadvantaged groups. Children with disabilities, I'm sorry I left that out, children with learning disabilities and physical disabilities. All these together needs a combined strategy in terms of addressing their educational needs and enhancing their educational participation. And for that, we suggested that we will have special education zones, we will have enhanced scholarships, we will provide for access facilities, we will provide all those inputs that are necessary, like books and cycles and reading material and language translated material, teachers who can speak in the local languages, all these as measures to ensure that children coming from these disadvantaged sections of the society get an equal opportunity for education. Because if we are committed as a country to the sustainable development goals, you cannot achieve any sustainable development goal if education is limited to a few sections of the population and the bulk of it are outside the mainstream education. So equity is covered in chapter 6 and chapter 14, and I'll talk about that once again when I come to higher education. Now, on the governance part of school education, there are changes in terms of trying to set up a state school standards authority, which will lay down some benchmarks, how schools need to be performing. They will also have a school assessment and accreditation framework. They are also planning quality assurance, SQAAF kind of a framework. The school quality assurance and accreditation framework to be prepared by the State Council for Education Research and Training, the SCRT. And we will also ensure that schools can be accredited just as we accredit higher education institutions. So, and school complexes are a reconfiguration of schools for sharing of infrastructural and human resources to the optimal extent, because the policy also very clearly says that both public and private institutions will be treated at par, in keeping with the spirit that we recognize that the private sector is very much operating both in the school education and in the higher education. So you cannot have a policy which applies only to public and public funded, public aided institutions, and leave out the private sector altogether. They also need to come within the ambit of the national education policy. Now, coming to higher education, and in that, from class 6, that idea that I told you about doing away with the curricular separations flows into higher education and talks in terms of providing at the undergraduate level a flexible 3 or 4 year integrated, holistic, multidisciplinary, or liberal education. This idea of moving away from discipline specific arts, science, commerce, technology, engineering, pharmacy, nursing, medicine, agriculture, all these single discipline specializations have to be changed. Why? The first part of it that I told you, knowledge is a porous thing. Knowledge is not single discipline. Knowledge today in the 21st century is something that permeates into one another and contributes to interdisciplinary learning, multidisciplinary learning, transdisciplinary learning. And therefore, the kind of skills, the kind of knowledge distinctions that we have as hard separations have to be done away with to move towards multidisciplinary education, which would require that undergraduate education will allow students to choose subjects ranging from engineering on one side to dramatics on the other end, to language on one side, to social sciences. How is this possible when most of our institutions or higher education institutions are not able to offer it? So we have said that till our higher education institutions can move to become multidisciplinary by adding new departments, because it involves a lot of investment, finding out the faculty for that, and it is a time-taking exercise. Let us have a higher education cluster where institutions enter into an academic arrangement with other institutions to allow students to take admission in X institution, but take up courses from other institutions wherewith we have entered into an academic arrangement or a collaboration. And that kind of an academic arrangement, say there is a college which is offering only science-based courses or physics, chemistry, maths, and the student is allowed to say that, no, you can take along with physics, economics, or you can take pharmacy subject, or you can take agriculture subject, or music or dramatics. This is not there in that college at all. Then the mapping of the institution should be done in an area so that the other colleges which are there in a vicinity of about 20 to 30 kilometers will be a part of that academic arrangement of an HEI cluster, where students can acquire credits from those institutions also. Obviously, in the academic arrangement, one will have to ensure that timetables are sort of made in such a manner that on a same given day, a student is not subjected to a lot of the inconvenience of having to commute from distances, rather is doing maybe 2 days in which that particular topic is being covered in another institution. Now, suppose a student is coming and wanting to do a course which is not there in a college which is in the geographical vicinity, then the student can choose to do it from MOOCs available through the Swayam platform of the Government of India or through an open university system. So the flexibility is coming by allowing the change in the mode of learning. And even today, I think most of us are aware that the UGC has clearly said that 40% of the credits at an undergraduate program can be acquired through online education, either through MOOCs or through ODL systems. Now, that is the next flexibility that we are giving. How is all this going to be possible? Before I go to the other flexibility, we have said two tools or two instruments. Creation of an academic bank of credit, which is a digitized credit bank, storing the academic credits earned by a student from multiple institutions or from multiple modes of learning. ABC is already there. It is notified by the UGC. Some of you can visit the site. Initially, we have said that we will onboard only 100 institutions who are the top ranked institutions, because any such change, you need to run it like a pilot for some time and then allow it to be scaled up. So it gives also institutions the time to start understanding how the ABC works. So the ABC is already one of the factors, one of the recommendations of NEP that is implemented because it is notified. It's a question of time of scaling it up. So the Academic Bank of Credit allows for each student's grade card to look quite unique, because A would have taken physics with economics, with carpentry, with maybe English, and maybe mechanical engineering. Another student B has taken, let us say, chemistry with agriculture, with law, and maybe any other subject. So the grade card of every student will look distinctly different, as unique to the choices that the student makes. And this is all being digitally stored and therefore available for access at any point of time. You know, whatever is digital is never perished. It is there for storage and anyone can access it at any point of time. But when we say it is there for eternity, we do not mean to say that we will allow students to do these courses and these credits in an eternity-based kind of an exercise. We have said exit and entry, multiple entry and multiple exit, saying that at the end of every year, given with the concept of lifelong learning, we will give the student the flexibility to leave and rejoin, but there will be a certification. At the end of first year, a certificate. At the end of the second year, a diploma. At the end of the third year, a bachelor's degree. Now, the third year is significant because we have said that out of the total number of undergraduate credits, you take any combination of courses, you need to be sure whether you want to major and minor in one or two subjects. So more than 50% credits in one subject entitles you to get a major. And if you are taking 2 or 3 other subjects, those could be your minors. So at the end of the third year, if you want to really have a major, you must ensure that you will take more than 50% credits in one discipline so that you are a bachelor's in that majoring subject. Now, if a person chooses to exit undergraduate education completely at the end of the third year, it is perfectly fine. Such a student wants to do a master's degree, will do a 2 years of master's. Suppose the person leaves, I don't want to do a UG program more than 3 years, and therefore I leave at 3 years, you are not called a failure or you are not called a dropout. You have got a bachelor's degree with maybe majoring in a discipline and minors in 1 or 2 other disciplines. And you then want to do a master's, you will have to do a 2 years of master's. But assume that the student wants to do a 4 years of bachelor's and wants to do a bachelor's in which he or she wants to take 50% credits in 2 major disciplines. So you're going to get a bachelor's with majoring in 2 disciplines. Such a student will do only a 1 year of master's. The third option that you have is when you come to the 4th year of bachelor's, you decide to do a research project and you submit a dissertation equivalent to a MPhil dissertation. Then you do a bachelor's with research. Such a student is exempted from doing a master's and entitled to join the PhD program directly. So you are saying 3 different combinations or scenarios of a flexible 3-year, 4-year undergraduate program. Now, when we say a student can join and leave at some point and rejoin, that period cannot be infinite. So the Academic Bank of Credit, if you read through the notification, says it would be something like 7 years. So let us assume that UGC or the Higher Education Commission of India, whichever comes in, if at all it came into existence by that time, that from the academic year 25-26, we will float across the country the new undergraduate program of 3 years or 4 years. I join in 25-26. I complete my first year and I go and do my second year in 26-27. Then I take a break. I need to ensure that I need to join my undergraduate program within that maximum of remaining 5 years so that I complete my third year and my fourth year. So it is not an infinite period. One, because the obsolescence of knowledge is a risk. What you learned may have completely changed in that scenario. The other is that the spirit with which you want to come back to education as time passes is unlikely to attract you back into the education system. So that should also not be a self-defeating exercise. So this is the flexible undergraduate program that we are looking at in sync with learning in the 21st century, which is learning to know, to do, to live together and with others, and finally learning to be the multiple intelligences. And in all these undergraduate programs, we would like children to be exposed to, or the students to be exposed to the 21st century skills of good communication skills, of collaborative learning, of scientific temper, of doing teamwork, of handling stress and time management, which are all the skills that are necessary to survive in an economy which is so challenging and dynamic. Now, why this need for multidisciplinary also is to be understood. The nature of jobs, we are saying, many of you would have heard this statement, we do not know what the jobs of tomorrow are going to look like, because job profiles are changing with artificial intelligence and robotics and so on. So if you learned a single discipline and that has become more or less irrelevant, it is likely that you're looking at a certain set of students who are doomed for unemployment because they don't know anything else. Whereas if you knew a little bit of many other disciplines, you can bank upon that to reinvent yourself for a new kind of a job profile, because this is something that you had underwent at your undergraduate program. And mind you, an undergraduate student is about 18 years. So the seriousness of the student who has the right of franchise and exercises the choice to make a government is to be given credence to, and intelligence of that student must be respected by the system. So we have this many statements that the student is not interested, is not serious, and so on. That's because the student feels an irrelevance of what is being taught to the real world situation, and the disconnect between the world of education and the world of work drifts the student from an education system, mentally switching off that student in the higher education university portal. Now, on the structure of higher education, the NEP talks in terms of looking at higher education from the function that higher education institution perform. The function is knowledge dissemination, which is transmitting information, information dissemination, knowledge production, which is research. And the third is the community engagement and the social engagement, giving it back to the society, the service part of it. These are the three dimensions: teaching, research, and extension. That is what higher education's functions are. And we have one of the largest higher education systems in the world, which 1,000 plus universities, 15,000 standalone institutions, so about 40,000 affiliated colleges, called by a variety of names as centrally funded universities, state universities, private universities, deemed universities, unitary universities, affiliating universities, and so on. All that we are trying to say in NEP 2020 can be defined by the character of the institution as teaching intensive universities, which focus largely on undergraduate teaching with some focus on PG and doctoral education, or research intensive, which is largely PG, doctoral, and postdoctoral education with some areas of undergraduate education. And a third category, the 40,000 affiliated colleges, which at one time played a very significant role in ensuring access to higher education, where you could not go on creating new universities. Today has become a very unwieldy set of institutions. And I'm not trying to say that all affiliated colleges, we are all products of an affiliated college system. But over a period of time, there are a number of affiliated colleges which are taking the advantage of the name of the host university, but do not offer the quality of education offered by the host university. All that they're doing is conducting examinations twice a year, not paying attention to the academic inputs and the academic resources, not having much serious education, or rather the quality of education is just nil there in those places. Such a student is actually having a certificate in the hand of a very premier university, but when that student goes before anyone for either employment or for research, the person is actually cutting a very sorry figure because not much learning has taken place. In order to rectify that and to ensure that Gradually, over a period of 15 to 20 years, the affiliation system could be phased out. And we have degree granting autonomous colleges, which is a long exercise. And it is not to say that overnight it would happen. Some colleges which are already autonomous can think whether they would like to become a teaching intensive university or whether they would like to be an autonomous degree granting college. And mentorship of the host university, support from the state government, with all this ensuring that certain academic standards and benchmarks are achieved, over a period, we will want graded autonomy so that over a period of about 15 to 20 years, we can see a scenario of 40,000 colleges actually becoming some 20,000 universities or 20,000 autonomous colleges with a, let us say, a viable number of students, and which ensures the quality of education and instruction which is befitting of a high quality higher education system. However, because equity is a major concern and there may be colleges in remote areas, such cases we will have a caveat that such cases where access is not available, this system of affiliating system may have to continue for a sizable period until really we can actually ensure that they can get good quality education. Alternative could be that some of them could become constituent colleges of a host university, or because the policy is also talking of multidisciplinary education and research universities coming about with a network of hub and spoke model situation, we may think that that may be able to address the aspect of equity in access to higher education. So when making a recommendation that the affiliation system needs to be phased out, we are conscious that we should not do it in a manner which denies children who are living in geographically inaccessible areas the right to higher education. Now, it is equally important that while this restructuring is taking place, we have also made very strong recommendations for mainstreaming vocationalization in higher education, because the current BWalk program also will have to become multidisciplinary, and therefore this single discipline of vocational will go, which will also be a part of the multidisciplinary education. We will also strengthen open and distance learning so as to ensure that quality distance education programs are offered. And this is inevitable because a brick and mortar education cannot be in line with the concept of lifelong education. You cannot do that because you may be wanting to acquire a new qualification when you're 40 or 45 and may be very apprehensive with your own children having reached an adult age to think in terms of going back to a college to acquire a qualification. So strengthening an open and distance learning format becomes very inevitable, but you need to ensure the quality of education. And so we are talking of accreditation also within open and distance education. We are also talking of internationalization of higher education, allowing the flexibility of joint and twinning programs, setting up of an international students office. And at other end, we are also saying that given the fact that mobility is a reality in today's globally connected world, not just the student and the faculty mobility, ideally it should be both institutional mobility and credit mobility. So we are allowing for foreign universities to open campuses, and the apprehension that opening of foreign universities in Indian soil might actually deny education to many is a misnomer in a certain sense, because on the other hand, many who are going outside and the drain of revenue that happens from the Indian soil may actually be stalled, because many of them may not want the children to go into environments which are not very familiar and are doing it within their own home environment. And given the pandemic, a sizable number of parents may start rethinking in terms of sending their children outside. But this is a legislative reform. It has to come about like a bill, and only if it is passed in the parliament, only then we can have that happening on the ground. Vice versa, Indian universities will be allowed to set up their campuses in other countries. And in a certain sense, therefore, our global presence would be recognized and would be taken, leveraged or taken advantage of by other students in other parts of the world also. Now, NRF, or the National Research Foundation, is the other major boost that has come for knowledge production and knowledge generation. While we are all aware that many of our universities do not feature in the global rankings, one has been the poor research output from our university system. which still today focuses largely on knowledge dissemination and not knowledge production. Therefore, research publications, developing patents, and many other things which are required in the research field are absent. So the NRF is supposed to be a umbrella body which will catalyze research in our higher education institutions, encourage multidisciplinary research, encourage research in cutting edge areas like artificial intelligence and so on, and bring about a network of industry, academia, and higher education institutions coming together for bringing out more research which would be beneficial to both the economy and also to the society as such. At the same time, state universities, we would like to see research being nurtured and germinated through seed grants, etc., being given at undergraduate education. So the NRF will not necessarily stop the research funding coming from DST, DBT, ICSSR, and so on. These fundings would continue. Over and above that, a corpus has been given to NRF, which is almost to the tune of about 20,000 crores for the 15th Finance Commission period, more or less. And therefore, a lot of additional funding can go into our university system. Here also, there was a lot of apprehension that everybody's PhD and research project will be cleared by a single window. None of these things are envisaged in the NRF. That remains within the autonomy and the powers that the state universities and higher education institutions enjoy. Now, a couple of points related to students and teachers. Now, on the students, if you're saying that we should give them the kind of learning in the 21st century, we are giving them multidisciplinary education. We are allowing their multiple talents to be showcased, but we should also allow that to be encouraged in the college environment or the university. And that is why we are saying that universities and colleges should have vibrant life in the campuses by having debating clubs, eco clubs, sports clubs, poetry clubs, all sorts of cultural clubs, and so on. And places like Kerala do not understand this because here we have youth festivals and things which are very commonly done. This is not done in the rest of the country so commonly as we do it here. And therefore, the multiple talents that we need to encourage have to come out by having these kind of opportunities for children, young students to participate. At the same time, the other aspect, their socio-emotional well-being, because of the stress that is coming and the suicides that are happening, we would like to see psychological counseling and also ensuring mental fitness through their physical well-being, through their sports and other activities, because we always believe a healthy mind lives in a healthy body. So the health indicators also of young students, in fact, the policy said that every university should have a medical facility. That is our far-off dream to achieve, but we are mentioning that the health and fitness of the young students have to be addressed. Substance abuse, these kind of issues which are actually affecting the physical health and the mental health of the children. And because of technology having made children isolated a lot, the need to have peer interaction through counseling has also got to be addressed. Thereby, what we have said, optimal learning environments where academic counseling, career counseling, psychological counseling, socio-emotional well-being, inculcating the constitutional values, 21st century skills, all need to come together in a holistic development of an individual to become a contributing, productive individual. This entire change will be coming about through the faculty. And therefore, we have said about energized, motivated, and capable faculty, recognizing the criticality of teaching as a profession, restoring the dignity of it, understanding the autonomy of the teacher as very significant, ensuring good service conditions, providing for their capacity building and their professional development on a continuous basis, and also saying that faculty needs to relook at their roles from being an information giver to becoming a facilitator, an enabler, a mentor, and a friend to the student. Students and teachers as equal partners in the learning exercise to enjoy what we call the joy of learning. Can we shift from the burden of education and the burden of learning to the joy of learning right from the school to the college? How do you do that? You create active learning environments where you have active learner engagement. Give them projects, give them quizzes, use gamification. Do not enter a class with just a chalk and a duster and start talking in a monologue. Involve them so that their intelligence and their knowledge is ignited, and make them participate in that learning exercise by giving them projects. And all undergraduate programs will have mandatorily internship projects, and if they are application based, will have apprenticeship. This is necessary in undergraduate education. One, to encourage their understanding of what happens in the world of work, to bring about a bridging between industry and academia, and also at the same time honing their entrepreneurial skills so that they can, as they need not necessarily think of only jobs that they're looking for. Can they themselves become innovators to create jobs? And therefore, centers of excellence, innovation clusters, the incubation centers, these are all being thought of at the undergraduate level. And we want collaboration between industry and academia coming together so that our young graduate students, so the faculty's role in leveraging all these becomes very important. So the role of the teacher is not that, okay, I have 5 classes today and I will go and take 5 and walk out. That's not. The faculty in higher education will be held accountable for the learning outcomes of their higher education students, which means that you need to know where the product that you have taught is doing tomorrow, 3 years down the line. And therefore, there is a certain commitment by the faculty to ensure that their students do not become unemployed and therefore can find some gainful opportunities. And that exercise that they did in the college is not something esoteric, but is related to their tomorrow's future. And that accountability is what we are saying in the NEP, but accepting that continuous training and their faculty capabilities must be honed, but also ensuring that they will be held accountable. And we have recommended a extended tenure or a probation period, because if someone is not capable of bringing about these kind of transformations in their students, then they should not necessarily be continuing in the profession which they are not suited to, because they are not delivering it. So the performance of a faculty is coming into question, and it cannot be that I enter the teaching profession, I retire out of it, I'm just not bothered what happens to my students down the line. That approach is being re-looked at in the policy. At the same time, we have said academic leadership, our higher education institutions should be headed by faculty and not by non-faculty people. And therefore, leadership development is also a part of the continuous professional development of faculty. For the schools, I must mention that we are talking about a national professional standards for teachers. NPST is also there, available in the public domain, seeking comments. And as far as school education, 4 new curricula are coming into being. As I said, one for the ECC, one is the curriculum framework for school education, then the curriculum framework for teacher education, and a curriculum framework for adult education. In higher education, we are only saying broadly that there will be a national higher education qualifications framework, which will determine the number of credits that need to be offered at an undergraduate program. But the entire content would be driven by the institution, which will make curricula, which is more or less in sync with the NHEQF. Because if you're talking of mobility and credits being transferred, there must be a sense of equivalence between the credits offered by A university vis-a-vis B university. You cannot have a lot of disparity that happens. And that disparity, please understand, is not to say there is a uniformization of syllabus. We are only saying that the syllabus should be able to cover broadly certain content areas, which is critical to that particular topic. So that an equivalence is established when a student, let us say, is going from MG University in Kerala to, let us say, University of Mumbai or the JNU or any university in Bihar or any other place. So that kind of national higher education qualifications framework, again, with embodying all these disciplines, which also NHEQF becomes critical, because higher education is all disciplines, and therefore legal education, medical education, technical education, agriculture education is all a part of the multidisciplinary education framework. Therefore, the importance of NHEQF And all these transformation where our faculty should shed their academic egos of my discipline being more important than another discipline. On the contrary, saying that all disciplines contribute to a knowledge economy, and therefore we need to empower our students by giving them all these disciplines in a complete package for their holistic development. The NEP 2020 also talks in terms of a major set of reforms for governance, internal governance of higher education institutions, and also the regulation. Internal governance, we have said a very important document to be brought out. Every HEI must bring out an institutional development plan, which is a strategic plan of action, looking at where the institution would like to see itself. It is prepared by them, completely democratic, not exercised by somebody else. You assess do an analysis of your own strength. It's like a SWOT analysis. You make your own assessment where you would like to see this institution going forward. And when I say you, I mean the body of the management within the institution. We have said an empowered body or a board of governors, which will have a composite representation of faculty, students, civil society, industry, parents, local academicians and educationists in a composite body working out a strategic plan of action, 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, 20 years. Do you want to move from a college to an autonomous degree granting college? Are you an autonomous degree granting college now? Can you want to become a teaching university? Are you a teaching intensive university? Want to become a research university? Laying out for itself a vision plan where it would like to go forward. What would be the additional infrastructural requirements, teaching resources requirements, technology requirements, all this being worked out. So on the internal governance, we have said no interference from the government, both political and administrative, but purely an academic exercise in relation to the industry, the scientific community, and the stakeholders, the parents, the teachers, and the students themselves, preparing an institutional development plan, which is a democratic exercise with an intention of seeing an actionable plan of action, plan for its own institution. On the regulation part of it, you're all aware that we have the regulators like the UGC, the AICT, the NCT, the Medical Commission, the National Medical Commission, the Bar Council of India. These are all the regulators. There are 17 odd regulators that are there in the higher end professional education field. What has the policy said that just as in a country which is democratic, believing in parliamentary democracy, we say the legislature, the executive, and the judiciary cannot be in the same body. In the same way, there are 4 functions: regulation, accreditation, standard setting or academic standard setting, and financing. These 4 functions, by their very nature, need to be done by separate bodies. At the time when the UGC was brought out in 1956, and subsequently when the AICT came and then the NCT came, at that time, India's higher education system was not so vast as it is. As it evolved, it is really very unfair that the same body does all these 4 functions of regulating, of funding, of standard setting, and finance and accreditation, all by the same body. The policy simply said a light but tight regulatory system where the 4 functions of funding, accreditation, regulation, and academic standard setting are performed by independent bodies to prevent conflict of interest and over concentration of power in one body. And therefore, when we bring this about through a legislation, the question that came to us was, initially we never envisaged HECI, we only recommended in the draft NEP 2019 these 4 independent bodies. But a question that came to us at the time we were framing the NEP was that, who will control these 4 bodies if there are a lot of conflicts between these bodies, bringing the system to a standstill? And that is how the idea of an umbrella architecture of the Higher Education Commission of India as an umbrella body, which will be the overall coordinating body with 4 independent verticals: the National Higher Education Regulatory Council for regulation, the National Assessment Council, not the existing NAAC and the NBA. NAAC and NBA will become a subsumed within the National Accreditation Council, and there will be multiple accrediting agencies. A Higher Education Grants Council for the funding part of it, and finally, the professional standard setting bodies, including a General Education Council, which looks at academic standard setting. Now, once the HECI as a bill, the Honorable Finance Minister in her budget speech last on had already stated that the government will bring about a Higher Education Commission of India bill. It has still not been introduced in the parliament so far. The only session now remaining being the budget session. But once the bill is brought and it becomes an act, the moment it becomes an act, UGC, AICT, NCT become null and void. They no longer exist. And the regulatory functions will be created by the NHRC, NHERC. The existing NAC and NBA will get subsumed within the National Accreditation Council. Since UGC is not there for funding, the Higher Education Grants Council will take care of the funding of higher education institutions, both technical and higher, because there is no AICT distinction we are made. Mind you, the higher education institutions are going to be multidisciplinary. So the demarcation that technical will go under AICT and higher will go under UGC goes automatically away, and HEGC will take care of funding of all HEIs. And since academic standard setting will not be there by the UGC or AICT and all, there will be a General Education Council which will look at those courses not being covered by AICT or teacher education by NCT, which will become professional standard setting bodies. So your Agriculture Council of India, the Pharmacy Council of India, all these will be professional standard setting bodies. Now, in this regulatory architecture, 2 bodies have been left out or are not included, have been excluded. The National Medical Commission of India, the NMC, was brought out by the government through the parliament in 2019. And that replaced the MCI, the previous regulatory body for medical education. And the Bar Council of India also resisted the idea of becoming a part of the new regulatory structure. So while they are a part of the multidisciplinary education, the medical courses can be offered, legal courses can be offered under multidisciplinary education. In the regulatory framework, they are out of the ambit. So they don't concede their regulatory powers to the HECI. They remain outside. So this new architecture, moment the bill comes into force, will create these 4 bodies. And these 4 bodies also include the professional standard setting bodies, where all other professional councils other than the MCI and the Bar Council, other than the National Medical Commission and the Bar Council of India, will perform their roles as academic standard setting bodies for the disciplines that are being taught under their control. And since UGC is disbanded, we will have a General Education Council for such courses not covered by the other PSAs. This is the new architecture that will come into force. The remaining 7 minutes, I'll try to cover on the technology in education. So we have underscored the fact that technology is critical to improving the quality of teaching learning. We have said that there will be a National Technology Education Forum, the NETF, and this will take care of making decisions on the appropriate technologies to be used for dealing with different kinds of curricula, and that we will also use technology for educational management and MIS systems so that there is no duplicity of functions and there is a very streamlined, transparent way in which we undertake it. While that is true on the technology part, while the policy was being formulated, we were already struck by COVID. And therefore, the need to recognize the issues related to online and digital education has been covered in the policy, where we are understanding the reality of digital divide within this country and the importance of bringing about access to digital access to those who are coming from a background which cannot afford the kind of digital access devices. So individual preparedness, which includes the student preparedness, the faculty preparedness, institutional preparedness, plus strengthening of digital infrastructure, not only at the institutional level, but allowing students to access in such a way that where the last mile connectivity and the broadband penetration is not there, that we may be able to have offline education using the radio, television, community radios, satellites, and such other methods, including offline material to be made accessible, but not precluding print materials, etc., which still form the mainstay of teaching learning, has to be leveraged in a very optimal manner. And a dedicated unit to look at these issues was sought to be created both at the Government of India level and must be ideally replicated even in the state level, so that we are able to look at region specific requirements for digital access to education. Now, the fact that online education is a way forward, and we cannot run away from that because the pandemic seems to be there and it seems to be almost persistent. The human intelligence has to try and find ways that learning should not stop, and we should continue to be able to allow for learning by our young children living in any part of the country by making right kind of arrangements for them. That becomes very, very critical to happen. Now, I've left out a point of equity in higher education. And while I talked about the SCDGs in the school education, in higher education, one more important factor that we have looked at for enhancing participation is offering higher education in regional languages. So the AICTE has already announced that 8 states will offer their engineering programs in regional language. Now, this is not to say that we will not allow our students to learn English language, and therefore we are taking them away from English education. No way. We are only saying that many people do not join higher education because India largely lives in villages, coming from agrarian families who studied in their own regional language. The most deterring factor that precludes them from joining higher education is the medium of instruction. The moment they hear that they have to learn everything in English medium, they rather not continue their education. So as a policy, we have said that we will enhance our gross enrollment ratio in higher education from the current 27.1 to reach 50% by 2035. If this has to happen and sustainability has to be ensured, we need to provide for a game changer, and that has come by offering higher education. If higher education institutions would like, they have the teaching resources, they have the faculty, they are free to offer it in regional languages. And it is in keeping with this spirit that in the chapter on languages and promotion of languages, we have said more language departments have to be set up. An Indian Institute of Translation and Interpretation has to be set up. And e-content, which is the way forward for online education, should also be offered in regional languages. We have a misnomer that someone who speaks good English is very intelligent. And I think we need to demolish that altogether, because it is not the language in the medium in which you speak, but the content that is important. And we have, India is known for its plurality of languages. And should we not leverage those languages? Many parts of the European countries do not necessarily speak to you in English, but it's not that they do not perform in their economy or they do not get jobs. We also as a country need to understand the richness of our language and allow our languages to reach to that level that is accepted internationally, and learn many other languages, including English, but let it not be a factor that deters students coming into the higher education system. So the policy also in terms of commercialization of education, many were concerned whether we are encouraging a lot of privatization. I would really like to say that the policy has merely recognized a reality, a glaring reality, that the private sector is existing and offers it in school education, higher education, technical education, and professional education. They are there. If they are there, then they should be governed by the same set of norms and standards as applicable to public funded institutions in a absolutely technological driven, fair, and transparent manner. So, moment you bring technology, you cannot have anything going under the carpet kind of situation. Everything is known visibly. So the policy has clearly said that education is a not-for-profit activity. It is a public good, and you will make sure that education is used for the benefit of all sections of the society. Moment there is a commercialization of education, where you treat it as a commodity, and the commodification of it starts happening, and only those who are rich can start getting it, then penal action and stringent action is called for in the NEP 2020. So I would like to make people understand that the policy has reiterated what has been given in judicial pronouncements, and which is the extent policy that education is a public good. It is a not-for-profit activity. It is not a for-profit activity. It should be made available to all cross sections, and private institutions cannot commodify it by charging fees. You can cross-subsidize education, where you might charge those who can afford to pay something, but you will have to give it as scholarships to those who are meritorious but do not have the means. So on the role of the private sector in education, it is very much there. We have to accept it is there. We cannot close our eyes to that reality, but ensure that they are also regulated by the same set of norms and standards, and punitive action and strict measures to ensure that there is no commercialization that is taking place. Now, on the investment in education, the Kothari Commission report, and as way back as the 1968 policy said, the investment in education should be 6% of the gross development product. Now we are still at 4.43 for both school and higher taken together. But the policy has said this is a goal that we need to reaffirm, that we will try to invest 6% of the GDP. But we have not said the nature of public expenditure. There are many states, as far as the tune of public expenditure is concerned, as much as more than 20% of the public expenditure is on education. But as far as the investment is concerned, public funds coming in, that also one has to understand. We need to have innovative ways in which we tap resources, especially for the higher education from the corporate sector. Where is the product of a higher education system going out? Going out into the corporate world. Therefore, the need for the corporate sector to invest in higher education is also a social obligation. So you have CSR funds, but you need to have more than that in terms of investing from the corporate sector into the higher education system. Alumni funding, allowing for philanthropic contributions. These are some other ways by which we are talking in terms of enhancing the entire availability of resources for higher education. Now, I would also like to say that we need to look at other sources of funding, because you cannot look at only education budgets and make an assumption that this is the only investment. You have the 15th Finance Commission, which has made over and above what has been given in the annual plan allocations, funds for improving learning outcomes in school education, funds for online education, funds for making e-content available in regional languages. These are additional funds that have come over and above that. NRF is a separate funding that is being provided for. All these taken together will, to a certain extent, and also the projection that we would grow to a 5 trillion economy. COVID has been, of course, a dampener for that. But the fact that if there is a growth in the economy, we may be able to invest more in education. Now, implementation part of it, as I said, school education, Sarthak is already there as an implementation plan of action. It is already being done, and many of the initiatives are already underway, including the revamped Samagra Shiksha, which is the one which takes care of as a centrally sponsored scheme, with the center and the state government coming together in the sharing of the financial resources. And since it is an outcome-driven funding, these states as equal partners with the government of India are actually carrying out many of the reforms that are there in the school education. In higher education, the Academic Bank of Credit, the AICT has brought out a lot of reforms in regional languages. in the format of the entrance examinations that has been brought out by the NTA in terms of offering moving away from road based to other capacities being checked and tested. These are some reforms for internationalization, joint degrees and dual degrees. These are there as draft regulations. NHEQF is in the works. Many other changes in terms of faculty development, service conditions of faculty. So the work is in progress in higher education, but very few have really been reflected on ground as on date. But it is natural that you will find that these will take a couple of years to germinate and actually become fully functional. But hopefully, we would see most of the changes coming into effect within a period of about 7 to 10 years, except, of course, the doing away with affiliation system, closing down the standalone institutions will take a much longer time. In school education, it is also important that the 4 new curricular frameworks have been entrusted to a high-level steering committee and the work is in progress. On adult education, of course, the curriculum framework is in the making, but since again, this is something that state governments need to use their existing structures that are already there for enhancing literacy, it should be on a sustained basis. And the focus has been to move away from merely mere literacy to looking at functional literacy, digital literacy, legal literacy, and financial literacy. These are the kind of literacy skills that we should look in a population where as a country we are having a growing aging population also, and they also should become self-sufficient so that issues relating to geriatric population also is being addressed and their dependency is also reduced to a great extent. So overall, the policy, the NEP 2020 is a comprehensive document which has looked at all the subsectors of education and understood that education is to be looked at in an integrated manner, with each subsector having an impact on the subsequent levels and the subsectors. And therefore, the NEP 2020 is truly a transformative document, which, if it is implemented in its true spirit, will be able to empower our youth and our students to become productive individuals, our teachers to become the transformers of change, and our educational institutions to reach into the global world rankings. If the NEP 2020 by 2040 is totally sort of implemented on ground, we will see a totally reformed Indian education with a new paradigm in place, which will be absolutely in sync with the requirements of the 21st century and also prepared for the challenges that this century throws forward. So I hope the NEP 2020 will inspire each one of us as educators, whether students or faculty or researchers or parents, and those who head institutions to come together to contribute one's own might in trying to bring about these transformative changes. Let's not wait for directions to come, but let us own the policy and let us try to implement it in the spirit that it envisages, and to the extent that we can do that as an individual in implementing NEP 2020. Let me wish the conference all success and GEMS 2022 to be a successful event in all its endeavors. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Shakila T. Shamsu, for your deep insight. With this, we have come to an end of today's session, and once again, we do take this opportunity to congratulate all the winners and participants. Results are now available on our website www.gems2022.in. And I request all the winners to share their photograph to the WhatsApp number 859-309-1188. See you at GEMS 2023. Thank you and have a nice day.